On February 1st, 2003, the Columbia Space Shuttle was re-entering Earth's atmosphere. As the crew was re-entering the atmosphere, the members on board were killed in an explosion due to heat protective foam on the external tank falling off the shuttle while returning home. The accident had killed all 7 crew members and was the second fatal crash in United States history, the first being the Challenger disaster. 3 days after the disaster, the then-President George Bush gave an emotional memorial address to the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Reviewed as a determined speech, giving hope and well-being to the families grieving, and a speech that renews excellence in tragic times. John McCain, former Senator of Arizona, stated it best, "A nation expresses its heartfelt grief to the families through the emotional words of President Bush." George Bush was given a tough task to address the families of lost astronauts, people he did not know personally. However, through careful research, beautifully crafted rhetoric, and outstanding speech delivery, President Bush managed to successfully show his sincere grief and give the mourning families a sense of peace. Like many eulogies before, George Bush's memorial address is very pathos-driven. He talks about all 7 astronauts and how their unique paths of life brought them to space exploration. While talking about David Brown, an astronaut on the mission, he mentions, "David Brown was first drawn to the stars as a little boy, with a telescope in his backyard." When talking about another fellow man on the mission, Michael Anderson, President Bush says Michael Anderson always wanted to fly planes and rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. Along the way, he became a role model, especially for his 2 daughters and the many children he spoke to in schools. We often consider astronauts as these superhero-like figures, but by addressing their early lives and personal lives, President Bush humanizes the victims and allows for the public to see that these heroes were ordinary people, like every other American, having the same hopes and dreams. Humanizing them allows for the audience to identify with them, creating a sense of empathy and sympathy. In this address, there's a lack of ethos and logos. Many would consider this ineffective, but I think it is perfect to not really include these. Ethos is credibility, and President George Bush does not need credibility when it comes to sharing a tragedy like the Columbia. As for logos, he does not need logic and facts to support him in addressing the friends and families of the victims. With the lack of logos and ethos, this memorial address thrives even further and is very much effective. George Bush masterfully incorporates rhetoric devices to create a sense of peace and calming to the grieving families of the victims. When President Bush is talking about Kapana Chawal, he uses figurative language to beautifully honor the fallen astronaut. "She always wanted to reach the stars. She went there and beyond." He goes on describing the rest of the crew that perished. President Bush knew that there would be skepticism about the space program after a tragedy like the Columbia. To address that, he gives a metaphor that appeals to the 7-year-old in all of us. This cause of exploration discovery is not an option we choose. It is a desire written in the human heart. This metaphor really opens up the audience to the imaginations of themselves as children. Everyone remembers the time they gazed up at the stars and imagining the endless wonders of the unknown sky above, wishing they could go up and discover the dark, infinite unknown that is called space. President Bush masterfully appeals to the childlike imagination in all of us to effectively convince others to continue the pioneering of space. Later, President Bush uses repetition to repeat something he stated earlier, to not only to appeal to pathos, but to reassure the space program should go on. David Brown, an astronaut on the mission, had told his brother a few weeks before the mission that this program will go on, if something were to happen. President Bush quotes Captain David Brown. "Captain Brown was correct. American space program will go on," he states. By quoting David Brown, President Bush creates a sense of honor for the fallen victims, and an idea that these fallen heroes would want their fellow co-workers to push on in space pioneering. President Bush's main goal here, however, was not to persuade NASA to continue on in space exploration, but to honor the fallen astronauts and bring a sense of peace to the grieving friends and families. Due to this, there is no seen logical fallacies, as he is not trying to persuade, but he is trying to comfort and to mourn. He brings such comforting words through sympathetic speech delivery. When talking about such a tragedy in American history like the Columbia disaster, President Bush needs to tread lightly. He delivers a speech with a calm voice and strong body posture to show strong leadership in the face of adversity. By doing this, he reveals a sense of hope and promise, not only to NASA, but to the people of the United States. President Bush skillfully, through careful research, excellently crafted rhetoric, and sympathetic speech delivery, gives a more than effective memorial address to the friends and families of the victims of the Columbia space disaster. By using metaphors relating the crew to the average American, as well as figurative language to beautifully honor the fallen heroes of the Columbia, President Bush offers a successful eulogy in Houston, Texas.